So really, we are looking at a very incomplete budget request when we are just 4 months out from the beginning of the next fiscal year.
I'm not saying that's it's all the fault of the shipyard. There are many ways in which modifications were made that changed an existing design so extensively that it led to a ship that was not even capable of the original mission it was supposed to execute. So our job is to make tough choices on some platforms like that may not be funded the way they were in the past, because we have to make some of those tough choices.
Senator Tammy Baldwin, the first woman Wisconsin ever sent to the Senate, a lawyer and a senior defense appropriator, just asked Pete Hegseth a question the Secretary of Defense couldn't answer. Under what legal authority are active duty Marines being deployed into American neighborhoods in Los Angeles? Not National Guard, Marines, active duty federal troops on American streets. Baldwin points out that the president had already cited a specific statute for the Guard, so she pressed him for the specific authority behind the Marines. Hegseth waves vaguely at the Constitution, admits he'd have to look up the provision, and falls back on historical precedent. Baldwin, a lawyer, doesn't let it go. I'm not asking about precedent. I'm asking you to cite the authority. He can't. He promises to follow up. The Secretary of Defense sent Marines into a U.S. city and couldn't name the law that let him do it. Watch this.
If you want to support the channel and get exclusive videos, hit the join button below. That's how we keep this going.
Mr. Secretary, what is the authority that the administration is using to deploy active duty Marines to California neighborhoods? What authority?
Senator, the president has constitutional authority in order to support.
Cite the provision of the Constitution.
I'd have to pull up the specific provision, but our Office of General Counsel, alongside our leadership, has reviewed and ensured in the order that we set out that it's completely constitutional for the president to use federal troops to defend federal law enforcement.
Look, I'd like to know the specific constitutional statutory authority. The president made it clear that he relied on Section 12406 of Title 10 with regard to the National Guard troops. I need to know the authority that he is relying upon in terms of active duty Marines being deployed to California neighborhoods.
Senator,
so you'll follow up with me?
Yes, Senator, but there's plenty of precedent of active duty troops being used to support law enforcement. Historical precedent.
I'm not disputing that. I am just asking you to cite the authority under which the active duty Marines are being deployed to California.
It's in the order, ma'am, but we'll make sure we get it to you as well.
Thank you. I want to dovetail on a couple of other comments also with regard to the lack of specific detail in the budget request for the Department of Defense. I take great pride in Wisconsin's contributions to our national defense, and that includes many Wisconsinites who are hard at work building the Constellation class frigate. There is no mention of frigate procurement, just like Senator Collins noted that there's no mention of destroyer procurement in the budget materials that you provided to this committee. My state makes the frigate. I'd also note that there's no mention of the destroyers, as I said. So really, we are looking at a very incomplete budget request when we are just 4 months out from the beginning of the next fiscal year. Mr. Secretary, this committee takes the appropriations process seriously. I take the hard work of Wisconsin's shipbuilders seriously, and I'd like your commitment to provide this material to the committee expeditiously so we can do our work.
Senator, we'll make sure you get all the information, but what I would say is this is a historic investment in shipbuilding, both the defense industrial base and ships. In Wisconsin, and particularly related to the frigate, it's been a program with a lot of problems and a lot of delays and a lot of modifications that have led to serious challenges.
Navy has called for many modifications to the plan.
I'm not saying that's it's all the fault of the shipyard. There are many ways in which modifications were made that changed an existing design so extensively that it led to a ship that was not even capable of the original mission it was supposed to execute. So our job is to make tough choices on some platforms like that that may not be funded the way they were in the past, because we have to make some of those tough choices.
Well, we don't have any of the detail right now of what your plans are with regard to the frigate or the destroyer, and we need that information to do our jobs. Can you get it to me?
We have that information, Senator. We have worked in real time in 4 months to reverse a lot of priorities from the previous administration. We have those details and that information, and we will get it to you.
Well, the committee needs those details. So this committee has also worked hard alongside the department to improve recruitment and meet retention goals. The department is planning to separate several thousand service members due to your partisan beliefs about troops who are transgender. Mr. Secretary, I've seen your speeches and social media posts, but what I'm interested in is the sound policy analysis that we would expect from the Secretary of Defense on how this misguided decision will impact military readiness. My colleagues and I have requested this information from you, and we are still waiting to receive it. And so I will ask you now, what assessment did the Department of Defense conduct prior to implementation to evaluate the impact that this policy would have on our national security? Moreover, what is the cost to recruit and train thousands of individuals of comparable experience and skill?
Thankfully, recruiting is not an issue. It's at historically high levels, and we're proud of the cross-section of Americans that are joining.
What analysis did you do?
We did extensive analysis, Senator, and we agree with the assessment of the executive order that was issued by the White House that there are mental health issues associated with gender dysphoria that complicate military service and readiness, and as a result, we made the decision.
I have asked for that analysis. Please provide it to me and the committee.
We will provide it.
And then, Mr. Secretary, I think we can all agree that we are at a critical point in our history with respect to global threats that need to counter adversaries like China and Iran. You've gotten a number of questions along those lines. And I'm disappointed that you are instead focusing on a class of ships named for civil rights leaders. You chose Pride Month to direct the Navy to rename a ship named for Navy veteran Harvey Milk. This committee will continue to pursue serious work in the interests of American national security, and I ask you to choose to join us in that endeavor.
A full year continuing resolution bad for the Department of Defense? Just yes or no?
Sir, a full year continuing resolution is never preferable for any department, especially the Department of Defense. Not preferable.
And I know, General Kane, I don't need to ask you because your written testimony specifically says routinely operating under continuing resolutions lowers buying power, results in less deployable capital, makes it harder for industry to make long-term investments. And is it your commitment, Mr. Secretary, that you'll work with us to achieve a full year appropriation? You'll submit the budget documents necessary, work with us closely, that we'll be able to do our work so you can do yours?
Senator, we are committed to working with you to make sure the Defense Department gets as robust a budget as possible where we can meet the threats of today and tomorrow.
Thank you. I'll just say at the outset for all my colleagues, I am increasingly concerned that there is a threat that some believe they can best govern by continuing resolution, reconciliation, and rescission, and not ever actually have us appropriate. So I look forward to working with you to avoid that outcome, which I think would both disregard the role of Congress and put all of us at greater risk. It seems to me clear with regards to Ukraine that Vladimir Putin has no serious intent of negotiating. He continues to attack civilian targets night after night with hundreds and hundreds of drones. The Ukrainians have just carried out a spectacular attack against military targets. And it seems to me concerning that the 2026 request eliminates aid to Ukraine entirely. At the same time, the Senate has a strongly bipartisan bill led by Senator Graham and Senator Blumenthal to impose more sanctions on Russia, and many senators of both parties want to provide more aid to Ukraine. Would you agree, Mr. Secretary, that the United States should use every tool it has at its disposal, including additional sanctions, to pressure Russia to come to the table to negotiate a just and lasting peace for the war in Ukraine?
Senator, every tool at our disposal? No. We have a lot of tools in a lot of places.
Let me be more
narrow.
then. You said, and I'll take some exception to this, that our European allies cannot freeload off the United States in perpetuity. My impression is that Article 5 of the NATO treaty was only invoked once. It was after 9/11. And a significant number of our European allies and partners deployed to Afghanistan alongside us and suffered significant combat casualties. In the first 2 years of the war in Ukraine, a war of Russian aggression, 50 other countries stepped forward, deployed military support, delivered materiel, provided financial and operating support, and at regular meetings of the Defense Contact Group, your predecessor led that process of deploying military assistance. What message do you think it sends? That as Ukraine continues to suffer day after day of punishing attacks on civilian centers, we're not using the $3.8 billion in presidential drawdown authority that remains to send additional air defense and interceptors, and you yourself chose to not attend the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. Mr. Secretary, why not use the already appropriated presidential drawdown authority to deliver defense material badly needed by Ukraine?
Well, Senator, as you know, the presidential drawdown authorities 71 through 74 still apply, and they are still flowing. There's some in reserve. To your question about my statement, and I served with a lot of NATO allies in Afghanistan as well. Incredibly capable Canadians, Brits, and Australians and others. And grateful for them. And I've gotten to know a lot of them in this process going to Brussels. Amazing people, amazing countries.
Thus, I was struck, Mr. Secretary.
But we also wore a patch on our shoulder.
Yes.
That said ISAF, International Security Assistance Force. And you know what the joke was? That it stood for I Saw Americans Fighting. Because what ultimately was a lot of flags, was not a lot of on-the-ground capability. You're not a real coalition, you're not a real alliance, unless you have real defense capability and real armies that can bring those to bear. And that's a reality that Europe is waking up to quickly, and we're glad, because they're our friends, and we want them to be safe and free and secure. And sometimes that takes true talk and tough love, and they've responded very well to that because we want them to succeed. And
Mr. Secretary, let's just make clear for the record that our military partners in Afghanistan included many who served and died. Our Danish partners and allies on a per capita basis
don't try to make it look like I don't care about the investments of our partners. Of course I do.
Mr.
I recognize
Secretary,
that there were lives lost from other countries.
Of course,
but the bulk of the effort was Americans, and an alliance needs to include other countries and be more balanced.
Mr. Secretary,
to be a real alliance.
As I pointed out in my opening comments, our partners and allies have stepped up, have invested, have engaged in the defense of Ukraine, and so should we. We should not be pursuing a ceasefire and a negotiated resolution to the war in Ukraine at any cost. Peace through strength means actually using our strength, continuing to support Ukraine, and securing a lasting peace. Putin will only stop when we stop him. And the best way to stop him is indeed through a stronger NATO. I look forward to the NATO summit. I agree with you that a significant investment by NATO in our collective security is a great investment, but we cannot abandon Ukraine. That would put us significantly at a strategic disadvantage. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let's be absolutely clear about what Tammy Baldwin exposed in this hearing. The Secretary of Defense deployed active-duty United States Marines into American neighborhoods in Los Angeles. And when a senator who is also a lawyer asked him to name the specific legal authority for doing so, he couldn't. Not the constitutional provision, not the statute, nothing. He promised to follow up. That he couldn't answer a question this basic is the whole story. She goes straight at it. What authority is the administration using to deploy active-duty Marines to California neighborhoods? Hegseth's first answer is a fog of generalities. The president has constitutional authority. He'd have to pull up the specific provision, but the Office of General Counsel reviewed it and confirmed it's completely constitutional for the president to use federal troops to defend federal law enforcement. Baldwin cuts through the fog. She wants the specific constitutional or statutory authority, and what she does next is devastating. What law precisely authorizes putting Marines on the streets of an American city? This is where the distinction Baldwin draws matters, and why her legal background makes the moment land. Deploying active-duty federal military forces for domestic law enforcement runs straight into a law nearly a century and a half old that generally bars using the Army and the other armed forces to enforce civilian law inside the United States. There are narrow exceptions, but they have to be specifically invoked. So when Baldwin asks Hegseth to cite the authority, she isn't being pedantic. She's asking him to identify the exception to a criminal statute that would otherwise forbid exactly what he's doing. And Hegseth's response is to retreat to historical precedent. There's plenty of precedent for active duty troops supporting law enforcement, he says. Baldwin, precise as ever, refuses the substitution. I'm not disputing that there's historical precedent. I'm asking you to cite the authority under which these Marines are being deployed. Precedent is not authority. A pattern of past practice is not a legal basis. Cornered, Hegseth can only say it's in the order and he'll get it to her. The Secretary of Defense could not, in a Senate hearing, name the law authorizing troops he had already deployed. Then Baldwin pivots to the budget and exposes a different kind of evasion. She takes pride in Wisconsin's role building the Constellation-class frigate, and points out that the budget materials contain no mention of frigate procurement. Just as a colleague noted, there's no mention of destroyer procurement either. 4 months out from the next fiscal year, she's looking at a fundamentally incomplete budget request. She presses Hegseth to commit to providing the missing detail so the committee can do its job. Hegseth's answer gives away the real agenda. He calls the frigate program troubled and delayed, says modifications changed the design so extensively that the ship couldn't perform its original mission, and frames cutting it as one of the tough choices the department has to make. In other words, the omission wasn't an oversight. It signals an intent to cut, and the committee is being kept in the dark about it. Baldwin insists, we don't have the detail, and we need it to do our jobs. Hegseth claims they have the information and will provide it, the same promise to follow up that ran through the Marines exchange. Then Baldwin turns to readiness and the decision to separate thousands of transgender service members. She's careful about how she frames it. She's not interested in Hegseth's speeches or social media posts. She wants the sound policy analysis a Secretary of Defense is supposed to produce. What assessment did the department conduct before implementation on the impact to national security? What's the cost of recruiting and training thousands of replacements with comparable experience and skill? Hegseth deflects to recruiting numbers and insists the department did extensive analysis backing the executive order's claims about gender dysphoria. For the third time in one round, Baldwin asks for the actual document. I have asked for that analysis. Provide it to me and the committee. The pattern is now unmistakable. On the Marines, on the ships, on this policy, the answer is always that the information exists and will be provided later. Never that it's here now. Baldwin closes by naming the misplaced priorities directly. At a critical moment with real global threats from China and Iran, she's disappointed the department is instead focused on renaming a class of ships named for civil rights leaders, choosing Pride Month to direct the Navy to rename the ship honoring Harvey Milk, a Navy veteran. Hegseth's reply that they're not interested in naming ships after activists only underscores her point. The through line of Baldwin's questioning is a lawyer and an appropriator asking, 3 separate times, for something that should already exist. The legal authority, the budget detail, the policy analysis. Each time she shot a promise instead of a document. And on the most serious question of all, the law authorizing American Marines in an American city, the Secretary of Defense had no answer to give.